And welcome to the Detroit Lions News Podcast. I'm your host, Joe Chapp, and today we're going to be talking about the Detroit Lions. Obviously, if you tune into this podcast, it's usually all about the Lions. Usually we mix in some NFL news, but since we're getting to kind of like the dog days of summer, we're going to have some 30-minute episodes. Today will be probably one of those, a 30 to 40-minute episode, just to kind of, give some little opinions out there about the Detroit Lions, and maybe we'll, obviously the schedule comes out. We thought it was going to be this Thursday. It might not be this Thursday. We do open up the podcast with news from Detroit with the signing of CJ Moore. Now, you may remember CJ Moore, a very good special teamer for the Detroit Lions. He was put on that gambling suspension. He will not. He will be back with the Lions, and that's good because one of the things that CJ Moore was really, really good at was being a special teamer, and that's something that you can't really understate. I mean, a lot of people they'll kind of understate it a little bit. That's their opinion, but CJ Moore, when he was on this team, he made some huge plays for the Detroit Lions at special teams, and I can only think about how good the special teams unit will be with CJ Moore and with Jalen Reeves-Maybin. Two critically important pieces on the special teams. Obviously, last year, Jalen Reeves-Maybin was up for the special teams player of the year. So it just goes to show you how much this Detroit Lions team values special teams. Now, we're going to talk about my breakout players today. Obviously, I'll have that opinion. I have an opinion on Hendon Hooker. It's new from this podcast. I'll get to it in the last segment. But first, let's start off with this. So I was praising the Detroit Lions website, and they had the workout photos. They usually have the workout photos, and you like this. You like to get a good look. You like to get a good glimpse of what the Detroit Lions could potentially be, what they're doing, and what's going on, things like that. I was going praising through their photos, and there was one photo in particular that I was very inclined with. And that was a photo of Mr. Brodric Martin. Now, Brodric Martin last year didn't play at all. He didn't play at all. And a lot of people wondered, was he going to be, what was he going to be? And I always tell people, when Ifeatu Melifonwu was after his rookie year, we didn't know what the hell he was going to be. We really didn't. We knew what Derek Barnes would potentially be going forward. We knew what St. Brown would be after their rookie year. But there's just some guys that you don't really know. And Brodric was one of those guys. So I'm looking at this picture, and I'm like, that's not Brodric. That's not Brodric. And then I see the caption, and it reads, and if you are on the Detroit Lions News Facebook, the podcast on YouTube, you could see this picture, but it's Brodric Martin with their workout photos. He's, in his workout attire. And then there is one from last year, and you could see the resembling difference in Brodric Martin's physical physique. And I remember a player from the Detroit Lions who also went through the same thing, Aleem McNeil. So Aleem McNeil, when he got off to his rookie year, it wasn't the best. Second year, he loses some weight. And then, obviously he gets better as he goes along. I thought maybe Brodric Martin is following the Aleem McNeil plan, because if he does, here's the thing. Brodric Martin is I think he has a really good two players to lean off of in that locker room. DJ Reader is an established NFL veteran, and Aleem McNeil is a young, promising player. And this is where it gets to a little bit of the crossroads, because I think a lot of Detroit Lions fans think that the Detroit Lions could re-sign Aleem McNeil. And, I would love to re-sign Aleem McNeil. I really would love to, re-sign Aleem McNeil. But the reality of the situation is there's not enough, money to go around. Eventually, you're going to have to pay Hutchinson. Eventually, you're going to have to pay Goff, potentially. We know some people want to, play hooker. But that's beside the point. You're going to have to pay some of these players that you're going to want to keep. And you're going to have to get rid of players that you really don't want to get rid of. But that's just the NFL. Sometimes you don't have the money for a certain player, but you have to spend it somewhere else. In particular, if you're a big Kirby Joseph fan, you got to weigh the consequences of how much is he going to cost and how much are we going to sign him for? Compared to a guy like Ali McNeil, who we saw what defensive tackles were making in the free agent period with Christian Wilkins. I don't think Christian Wilkins is anything great. I know he's had some good years, but I don't think he's this great player. And for him to get $25 million in the open market is kind of revealing of what could happen with Lee McNeil. So I'm just preparing people. You hope that you can get a deal done with Lee McNeil. You're hoping, but the reality of the situation is there's not enough money that can go around. If you want to sign Brian Branch in the future, you want to sign, whoever, you got to leave some money aside. And, if you're maybe Brad Holmes works out a finesse deal where they sign for 2 years and it really doesn't hamstring you in terms of that. But there's no player in the NFL that's really going to agree to that unless it's fully guaranteed. And that's kind of a who's who situation. But I think this, the way Brodric Martin looks in the workout period, I think he's poised to be one of Detroit's better players this year. I think maybe not in the first half. I think in the first half of the year, he's going to kind of get his feet under him. But I believe by the second half of the year, Brodric Martin is going to get his feet under him, and he's going to be a lot better. And I think he's going to be one of the people that's going to break out, in my opinion. The standard has been set. Lee McNeil, he once broke out in his second year to where you were like, okay, this guy's pretty good. And then in the third year, he's seen just a huge step up. And then, Brodric Martin, it's the same thing. You're hoping that he makes that step up in his second year. And then going into his third year, he's a useful player that you can have on that defensive line just in case you cannot re-sign Lee McNeil. And I'm not saying you're not re-signing Lee McNeil. I'm saying if there's a possibility that you might not be able to because of cap constraints. And that sucks. But the good thing about it is Brad Holmes has done enough homework. He's prepared himself in this roster for if he does have to make, a decision on the roster and the decision on how he's going to shape the roster for years to come. I don't think a lot of fans were particularly excited about the Brodric Martin pick last year, especially after he didn't play. But the more you think about it, the Brodric Martin pick is going to be a crucial piece because if Brodric Martin does live up to the hype, if Wingo lives up to the hype, or is just good enough, you could potentially say, yeah, we're good. We're going to move on from Lee McNeil. He's going to be costing $22 million. And we just don't want to match it because we're going to have to pay Aiden Hutchinson. We're going to have to pay the other young players on the roster. And we just can't pay the money that he wants. And that's the staunch reality of the NFL. You could hope that he comes in at a discount. You could hope, but hope's not a strategy, especially with Brad Holmes in this franchise. They can't hope that Lee McNeil takes a discount. They got to prepare for if he doesn't take the discount. And that's the key piece right here. If Brodric Martin, with the way that he's shown it in the workout session, and if it translates to on the field with the helmets on, this could be a huge thing for the Detroit Lions. And there's no ifs, ands, or buts. Brodric Martin needs to be good. If he's good, what it does, it opens up the flexibility that you might not need to re-sign Lee McNeil, and therefore you can make another decision on another player. So I'm kind of tripping over my words, but it's a decision. The Brodric Martin thing is a decision that will be made because Brodric Martin is playing good. And if Brodric Martin plays good, the Detroit Lions are going to be in a very good situation for at least the next 2 years. And you're hoping that Wingo, goes under the same path, and you're hoping that you can just rotate defensive tackles because at some point, you're going to be up against cap, and you're going to need Brad Holmes getting these extra value picks that a lot of people kind of dismiss, and this would be a big one. Brodric Martin being good in year 2, that's going to be a big kind of crossroads for Brad Holmes, and if he's shown anything, with the Fatu Melifonwu pick, that his players do develop and the coaching staff does develop this roster. And obviously, with the addition of Terrell Williams from the Tennessee Titans, I know for a fact that Terrell Williams is gonna have a huge impact on this Detroit Lions team. He's gonna have a huge impact. I watched him at Tennessee. I follow Tennessee Titans closely because they're my Southern team that I just kind of closely follow because I kind of like the colors and all that stuff. But that defensive line was really good with Terrell Williams as the defensive line coach, and they got better with Terrell Williams. And I can only imagine what he's going to do with Lee McNeil and Brodric Martin, Josh Pascal, and James Houston. Like, I think this defensive line could be a really strong point of this Detroit Lions team moving forward. And I think that if these photos are, show to be true, with Brodric Martin losing some weight and gaining a little bit of acceleration, a little bit of burst, that's good for the Detroit Lions. And I think that it's going to be a very good situation for Brett Holmes because this is something he kind of he hoped would happen. A lot of, general managers in the league, they hope that they draft these guys and that they will develop into the talent that they've developed into. But ultimately, when you get to the point where the player has to make the decisions, the player has to do the self-teaching, the self-coaching, and they have to be, they have to be obedient by themselves. They don't need a coach to tell them not to eat that. I'm looking for the word. I'm kind of, it's kind of pissing me off. But if Brodric Martin has lost the weight and he's gained some speed, he's gained some burst, this is going to be a very good sign for the Detroit Lions moving forward. It just has to, because there's a possibility, like I said, no Lee McNeil going into the future. He might command 21, 22, 23, 24, $25 million. And then at that point, you're making a decision, and it's better to have a defensive tackle in-house that has been, under your tutelage for the last 2 years than to be stuck kind of like out in the wind. Because I remember, if you remember right, when Ndamukong Suh left for Miami, they didn't have no one to replace him. They didn't have that next guy that you could say, yeah, he's going to replace him. And they could have drafted that next guy in Aaron Donald, but they didn't. And they kind of, took their own shots, and they thought that they were the smartest guy in the room, and it figured out to be not true. And you like what Brett Holmes is doing. He's not believing that, he'll find someone in the draft and they'll play that year. Your biggest thing as an NFL draft evaluator, as a GM, as a scout, you got to find guys that will develop into good players. Because in this 3rd or 7th round, if you look for high ceiling guys that, they could start right away, sometimes you might miss the best players. And some of the players that are the best are the ones that develop into that. And they come into a good program, they come into a good culture, and they kind of want to be part of that culture and be part of the change. And with players coming into Detroit, they're kind of seeing the change with the Detroit Lions, with Dan Campbell, with Brett Holmes. So much is going on with Detroit, and they've changed for the better. And it's good that they have a plan in place just in case the Lee McNeil does decide to leave, or they can't match. They feel like the contract that he wants is unsustainable. That's something that Brett Holmes is going to have to kind of manage. But in the next segment, which you'll hear right after, just don't worry. In the next segment, we're going to be talking about my breakout players for the Detroit Lions. As I have 4 breakout players, and you're going to see why, and I'll go through all of them. But